Hi, my friends. Welcome to Deep Six, the Deep State. Well, things are spinning now, aren't they? This whole dossier issue is coming crashing down around Hillary Clinton's ears, and it's a very good thing to see. It's all the stuff that we wrote about in Rogue Spooks. It's all of these predictions coming true. In Rogue Spooks, we said that we thought that Hillary had access to the dossier all during the campaign, and that she was quoting it during the campaign as she began to raise the Russia issue. And we raised the question of how could she have access to that, and implied that very likely she had funded it. So if you want to stay one step ahead of this evolving scandal, which is now, as Trump said today, bigger than Watergate, or as big as Watergate, get a copy of Rogue Spooks. It really will help you follow it. It's like a scorecard for it. And I'm very proud that we were able to anticipate what's going on, and we're able to flag it in this book, which we wrote in the spring. So things are really going strongly now. Hillary has, she hasn't admitted, but her law firm has admitted that Hillary's campaign and the Democratic National Committee put up the money for the dossier, funded the dossier. Now, of course, everybody has been asking for a year now who paid for the dossier, and Hillary just sat there silently and blamed the Russians and everything, and it turns out that she was the one who funded it all along. So she knew the answer to it, she just didn't tell us. And she lied rather profusely. In her book, What Happened, she says, and I'm reading from a book now, in the summer of start here. The FBI began investigating a dossier prepared by a well-respected former British spy that contained explosive and salacious allegations about compromising information the Russians had on Trump. The intelligence community took the dossier seriously enough that it briefed both President Obama and President-elect Trump on its contents before inauguration. And no mention that it was her dossier. And believe me, it's not out of modesty that she didn't list it. She just wanted to conceal it and to make us believe that this dossier was funded by independent people who wanted to get at the truth and wanted to expose it rather than a campaign document. But the fact that now she's been caught red-handed in this lie and lied to the media constantly really creates a new reality in this whole investigation. First of all, let's understand how this is typically Hillary. This is absolutely vintage Hillary. Remember how in 1992, when Bill was running for president, and he was surrounded by allegations of sexual relationships with different women, most of the charges true, she deployed what we called, Eileen and me, the secret police, private detectives who investigated these women and came up with information to try to cow them and terrify them into silence, saying that if you tell the truth about the relationship, about your relationship with Bill Clinton, we will come up with lies about you and about your past and material about that, and ultimately intimidated the women into silence. Now, that was all done through a law firm. She hired a law firm, gave the law firm money to hire these detectives to send them out to do her dirty work and amass this negative material on women. Well, that's just what she did here. She hired a law firm, gave it all the money it needed to hire this negative research firm to hire detectives to dig up negative material on Trump. Of course, this time she passed it off as being something that she had nothing to do with. She didn't admit that she was in fact really the author of all of this stuff. But it was typical Hillary. pretend to be above it, wear that beautiful white pantsuit to the debates. She's pure. Nobody could possibly have any doubts about that. And yet all the time she's in the trenches digging up dirt and dishing it out to the media to try to besmirch Trump. And when she couldn't find dirt, they made it up and they put it in the dossier and promulgated it for everybody to see. It's pure Hillary, absolutely vintage Hillary. You know, people sometimes ask me, why did you turn on Hillary? Did you have angry words? And I would say, no, I never had a fight with Hillary. Never had an angry word with her. I just saw what she was doing in 1992. It didn't come out until after I left the Clinton administration. But when you look back at it and I learned what was going on, how could you possibly support a woman like this for president? Anyway, these allegations against Trump became the basis of her whole campaign. In the debates with Trump, this was the main thing she said. It was the main charge against Trump, that he was Putin's puppet. That's her phrase that she used during the debates. And she commissioned a firm to come up with negative information. They didn't find any. They made a bunch up. And then this document, that was really nothing more than a campaign brochure, became the factual basis for her campaign against Donald Trump. And that was the whole basis of it. And now, in her book, What Happened, the whole book is about that, about how it was all the Russians doing. And this was totally concocted, totally fabricated by her in this dossier, and but done arm's length, so she'd have nothing to do with it, and prepared by a British spy to lend the veneer of verisimilitude, looking like truth to it. Just incredible. And Maggie Haberman, the New York Times reporter that's been following this, said folks involved in funding this lied about it, and with sanctimony, for a year. Yeah, they sure did. You know, when you directly lie to the media, they really know it, and they really keep track of it. You can fudge, obfuscate, fail to answer differently, answer about something that would imply the wrong way. When you out and out lie to them, that's something that they don't anticipate and really are shocked by. And it's clear that these shock waves are now running through the media. Okay, but now there is a lot of basic new questions that have to be answered because of this. The first is, who gave Steele the information in the dossier? And most likely, I believe it was an intelligence agency. Most likely, I believe it was the CIA, the FBI, and maybe MI6, the British agency. Did they choose Steele because he was former MI6 and because of his relationships with MI6? Was Steele part of an effort by the British to influence American elections and stop Trump from being elected? That's one of the central questions we ask in Rogue Spooks. Was it the British who were interfering with our election? Not the Russians, the British. After all, the British were the first people that gave a warning about Russian attempts to hack the Democratic Party. It was based on that information that we assumed that Russia was behind the hack of the Democratic Party computers. It was the Brits who initially supported the allegation of collusion and talked about it a lot. When Christopher Steele was outed as the author of the dossier, the British intelligence gave him a D directive, which told the media you can't cover this guy for 24 hours on the grounds of national security, to get him time to get out of town and basically to hide. The director of the British NSA, GCHQ, who was a very popular guy who had been appointed a few years ago and was widely revered in Britain, resigned right after Trump's inauguration. Was that because of the dossier and because he was compromised in that and having provided it? the Brits may have been deeply involved in this. Why did the Brits want to stop Trump from taking office? Well, Trump had supported Brexit, which they opposed. Trump had questioned the value of NATO. And the Brits live in a country that has been heavily infiltrated by the Russian oligarchs. So they took the idea of a new Cold War very seriously and were very upset at the idea of an American president that wanted a détente with Russia as opposed to resurrecting the Cold War. And then the next question is, was the dossier the basis for the unmasking that went on of Mike Flynn? Was it the basis for the FISA court ruling that Carter Page should be investigated, a former Trump employee, or that Manafort should be investigated? Was it the basis for the entire decision to name a special prosecutor? So what you have here is Hillary spends campaign money to do fraudulent negative research and then passes it off as not her doing. And as a result, it becomes the seminal document in the FBI and the CIA approach to the issue of Russia and the Trump campaign. It becomes the basis for the whole formulation of a special prosecutor. And that, of course, raises the question of should Mueller recuse himself. I want to read you something from the Wall Street Journal.
We have 1,000 people right now, just so you know.
Good. This is really beginning to percolate through the media. And when the Wall Street Journal writes something like this, it's very significant. And it permeates through. Should Mueller recuse himself? The purchase and consolidation of certain assets were facilitated by Canadian entrepreneurs, meaning uranium, who gave large sums to the Clinton Foundation and perhaps arranged a Bill Clinton speech in Moscow for $500,000. A key transaction had to be approved by Hillary Clinton's State Department. Now we learn that before and during these transactions, the FBI had uncovered a bribery and kickback scheme involving Russia's U.S. nuclear business, and also received reports of Russian officials seeking to curry favor through donations to the Clinton Foundation. This criminal activity by the Russians was apparently not disclosed to agencies vetting this 2010 transfer of U.S. commercial nuclear assets, uranium mines, to Russia. The FBI never told them that they were investigating this, never told them that there was a bribery plot to do this, that it implicated the Clintons, that involved giving the Clintons money. And yet the committee just went ahead blissfully and approved this agreement. The FBI made no move to break up this scheme, the bribery stuff, until long after the transaction closed. Only 5 years later, the Justice Department in 2015 disclosed a plea deal with a Russian perpetrator so quietly that its significance was missed until The Hill reported on it last week. This continues from the Wall Street Journal. For anyone who cares to look, the real problem here is that the FBI itself is so thoroughly implicated in the Russia meddling story, which means that Mr. Mueller has the means, motive, and opportunity to obfuscate and distract from matters embarrassing to the FBI while pleasing a large part of the political spectrum, the Democratic part. Mr. Mueller's tenure may not have bridged the two investigations into the uranium bribery, but Comey sure did. Rod Rosenstein's, Andrew was the guy who appointed Mueller as special prosecutor, Andrew Weissman, who is the guy who is Mueller's chief investigator, and Andrew McCabe, the acting director of the FBI after Comey quit. Mr. Rosenstein appointed Mr. Mueller as special counsel. Mr. Weissman now serves on Mueller's team. McCabe remains deputy FBI director. All were involved in the nuclear racketeering matter and the Russian meddling matter. By any normal evidentiary, probative, or journalistic measure, the big story here, Wall Street Journal says, is the FBI, its politicized handling of Russian matters, and not competently so. That's pretty impressive, and it really takes the scandal into an entirely new dimension, where Mueller is not an investigator; he's a principal, or he's someone clearly with an axe to grind and with vulnerability to try to protect.
We have a lot of comments pouring in and questions, but Karen Bowden says this is worse than Watergate. Andrew Humes, Mueller should be charged and convicted.
Well, let's take worse than Watergate.
Oh,
it
okay.
is, because Watergate in no way compromised American national security. This bribery plot resulted in the fifth of our uranium being delivered to the Russians. We are not self-sufficient in uranium. We need to import large quantities of it. And to get rid of a fifth of our uranium capacity and give it to our worst enemy is definitely treason.
Andrew Hume says Mueller should be charged and convicted. And Mark Rhodes asks, would the Canadian government be expected to provide donor data upon request into a criminal investigation involving the Canadian arm of the Clinton organization?
Yeah, it would. It could. And now the Clinton Foundation claims that they have revealed the Canadian donations. That's how we know about the $145 million that Frank Giustra gave the Clinton Foundation, its Canadian arm, in return for his visit to Kazakhstan that set this whole uranium thing in motion.
Anita McAfoos asks, what if he doesn't recuse himself?
Well, it casts aspersions on his investigation. It really means the investigator is now in the crosshairs, and it undermines the credibility of his investigation. And when the establishment media begins to press for his resignation or his recusal, eventually he will probably have to go, because it'll become clear that he can't be investigated. Just understand what's happening here, and I can't make it clearer. The FBI, the major investigative organ of the American government, is now itself under suspicion of treasonously suppressing news of an investigation of Russian bribery of the Secretary of State and a former president in order to get control of our uranium supply. And the FBI is accused of knowing about it and not sharing the information in order to help elect the person who received the bribes, Hillary Clinton, president. I mean, wow. It doesn't get worse than that. We're talking here about Mueller and about McCabe and Rosenstein and all these guys, but we're also talking about the FBI per se, that the FBI itself is mixed up in this and implicated in a very negative way.
William Fusey asks, if the DNC paid for the dossier, then the Obama administration should have known about it.
No, that isn't necessarily true. Hillary knew about it, and she obviously did, because it was her money. It was her campaign that was funding it. It's not obviously true that Obama knew about it, because they weren't one entity. It's possible, certainly is, but we can't be sure of that.
And Josh Anan asks, didn't they appoint a special prosecutor for the uranium deal today, and is he a good person to look into this?
No, not that I know of, no. There needs to be one, and I think we're moving down the road to one, but I don't see it now. But you realize what a seismic shift this is? It means this whole scandal that jeopardized the Trump presidency has now run into a wall, and instead it's shifting back to jeopardize the Clintons, Obama, and the FBI. The allegations have been denied, and the alligator is being hunted.
Well, Russ Nichols wants to know, how do we get those responsible prosecuted?
Well, that's what we're doing now. We're in this video, and all the stuff we're doing is part of raising consciousness so that it becomes necessary to name a special counsel and for Mueller to recuse himself. Now, yesterday, Steve Bannon, my favorite African hunter, bagged himself a rhino. He's one of the weird African hunters. He doesn't hunt for rhinos in Africa. He hunts for them in the United States. And by rhinos, I'm sure you know, it means Republicans in name only. And Jeff Flake, who is one such, bit the dust yesterday and announced that he was not going to run for re-election. And in a blast at the Republican Party, said he will not be complicit anymore in what Donald Trump is doing. He will not be silent. He said, for me to run for re-election, I would have to do things that my conscience won't permit, and all of that. Well, thanks a lot. Why didn't you let us know when you ran that you weren't really a Republican? And when you take what he's done and you look at the apostasy, the heresy, the hypocritical nature of Bob Corker in Tennessee, who was the Republican foreign policy person who was chairman of the Foreign Policy Committee and arranged for the whole Iran deal to be ratified by the Senate, he's now also basically recanted his republicanism. And John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, is making similar noises. You're looking at the breaking off of a huge chunk of ice from the glacier that is the Republican Party. And I say good riddance to it. There is nothing more important for the Republican Party than its purity. Remember that I've always said that the Democratic Party is a demographic institution. You're born into the Democratic Party. You're born black, you're born Latino, you're born to a union family, you're born you're disabled, you're gay. Your demographics make you a Democrat. But being a Republican is an intellectual proposition. You have to come to certain ideas and certain conclusions, and that makes you a Republican. That's why so many Republicans are former Democrats, like me, who were born into me because I was born Jewish, was born into the Democratic Party, but then intellectually worked our way to see how bad that was and how important the Republican Party was. And therefore it's a party that can only exist with purity. The Democratic Party exists through impurity because it's attempting to put together a coalition, the Rainbow Coalition they call it, of all different interests and ideas and patch together the differences. The Republican Party is based on certain key principles, and its adherence to those principles gives it the power and gives it the ability to sustain itself. And what Bannon is doing is cutting away those who are using the label of Republican without really being conservative.
Dick, Naomi Corbett-Kelsall asks, why do you think the media is suddenly exposing all of this? Are they backtracking to try to save face?
No, I think they just have to. I think that eventually when the facts change, the media has to reflect it. They can't just completely ignore it. You know, they wouldn't have viewers, they wouldn't have subscribers, they wouldn't even have advertisers. The way this got exposed, I'm sorry, was Naomi?
Yes.
Yeah. Naomi, the way this got exposed was that there was a lawsuit against BuzzFeed for libel by people who were libeled in the dossier, who were accused of being pawns of the Russians, or one guy sued who was accused of being the one who hacked the Democratic computer. And they said, hey, this isn't true. This is libel. This is hurting my reputation, and I am now suing BuzzFeed as the publisher of that libel. And BuzzFeed said, hey, wait a minute, hold it. Before you sue us, let's get to who wrote this dossier and who funded it. So BuzzFeed had the judge issue a subpoena to the law firm that Hillary hired that funded the dossier. And they had to admit the truth or face perjury in a lawsuit. And it was that forced the information out. And then when it comes out, the media has to comment on it. And at that point has to cover its tracks and make up for the nonsense it's been writing ever since.
Elizabeth Nassel wants to know, she saw a Clinton campaign person on MSNBC, and he's insisting the dossier contains truth. Is this going to be a successful tactic?
No, there is one. The only allegation in the dossier that's true is that Putin didn't like Hillary, and that Putin was rooting for Trump to win. The dossier itself is, and you read this in Rogue Spooks, is a collection of 18 different memos written over a period of time. One of the memos talks about Putin and his attitudes and his views, and that has elements of truth in it. Nothing to do with collusion and influencing the U.S. election, certainly nothing to do with Donald Trump. But the other 17 really do not have a word of truth in them.
Dick, a lot of people are asking, one of them is Polly Pelham, and then Richard Reel wrote in, can we start a petition to have Mueller removed?
Yeah, that's a very good idea. I will post a petition tomorrow. Would you remind me, Renee?
I will, yes.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Now, I want to talk about some other things. You may remember that I have warned in the past that there were two ways to get rid of Donald Trump as president. One was impeachment, which, you know, takes 2/3 of the House and the Senate. The other is through the 25th Amendment. The 25th Amendment that was passed, I think in the 1980s, says that if the president becomes mentally ill or is incapable of discharging the duties of his office, there's a procedure for removing him. A majority of the cabinet, the vice president has to initiate it. And then a majority of the cabinet or some other body that Congress names has to say, yeah, this is true. And then 2/3 of each house has to approve it. And the president either has to go along or can appeal, in which case Congress must again pass that he should be removed. And then he's removed temporarily. He can always ask to come back. And again, Congress makes that decision. But the adjectives the Democrats use about Donald Trump are so negative. And I've asked people to think about them and realize that these are not just random charges, epithets, adjectives. Many of them relate to the idea that he's psychotic, that he's not mentally fit. So at the center of this effort is John Gartner, Gartner, a psychologist who founded Duty to Warn, a network of mental health experts making a push into politics, and that set up something called the 25th Amendment PAC, both of which seek to remove Trump from office on the grounds that he's mentally ill. Gartner and his associates have not hesitated to diagnose the president in a variety of ways. None of them have ever met him, of course, much less analyzed him or been able to make a diagnosis. With some surmising that he is a sociopath, a narcissist, or suffers from a form of dementia. By the way, sociopath and narcissist, what the hell do you call Bill Clinton? Whatever the correct diagnosis may be, Gartner is confident that Trump is, quote, deeply and dangerously psychologically disordered, unquote. He has high hopes for the possibility of using the 25th Amendment to end a presidency for the first time in U.S. history. Of course, the amendment is only 25 years old. We hope to be the 25th Amendment what the NRA is to the Second Amendment, Gartner said, of the 25th Amendment PAC, whose use would you would use psychological language to critique Trump's behavior and policies. That is a real danger. I mean, keep it in mind. Pence obviously isn't going to go along with that, and that's a safeguard for us. But the movement to try to have Trump seen as mentally ill could develop headway, and I think it's ridiculous. You take, for example, the whole business with North Korea, who is in kind of a name-calling contest with Kim Jong-un. Have you noticed that once Trump started that, he hasn't launched any missiles? I mean, Kim Jong-un has to wonder, is Donald Trump nuts? And if he is nuts, he's got to pull in his horns. Because if Trump is nuts, he'll initiate a nuclear war and wipe out North Korea. Richard Nixon said it best. He said, and I'm quoting him now, "The duty of the President of the United States of America is to convince the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Union of Socialist Republics that he's crazy, that he's nuts, and that there's a real chance that he could launch a nuclear war that gives the nuclear deterrent credibility. And I think that by calling him Rocket Man and going crazy and taunting him, I think that Trump is basically convincing Kim Jong-un that maybe he's crazy and that maybe he would launch a nuclear war. And to use this and justify a 25th Amendment coup d'etat would be outrageous.
Well, Tim McKeon wants to know, first of all, he says he's reading Rogue Spooks. Can the intelligence agencies be rehabilitated, and how?
They sure can be. In Rogue Spooks, one of the chapters is how the FBI went from red to blue. I mean, the FBI was the group that hunted down communists and dissidents and really went after them. And the CIA was the agency that promulgated coups around the world to remove leftist regimes. And now they're being implicated in a left-wing plot to overthrow the government. And how did that happen? How did that change take place? And we write about how Brennan at the CIA and Holder at the FBI brought about this sea change that now has the FBI in the crosshairs as being itself the organ of criminality on this uranium bribe deal. Well, the way to rehab it is, of course, you appoint good people to head it, and they clean house in their agency. And I hope that that's going on. Dan Coates, the new director of intelligence, who Trump appointed, is a former client and a good friend of mine, and I hope that he's doing that. And I hope Christopher Wray is going to do that at the FBI. But I suspect that the only way to do that is to expose the depth of the bias and the left-wing penetration of these agencies. And I think these facts and these allegations are moving us down that road. Now, the European Union did something yesterday that really explains a lot of what the left is trying to do in the United States. I've talked to you before about how the goal of the left is to replace immigration with refugee and asylum seeking. In other words, when somebody wants to come to the United States, the left wants to say, you're not an immigrant. You're not someone who just made up his mind to do that yesterday. You're a refugee. You're someone who has such fears for his personal safety because of a repressive regime, or they say because of crime and gangs, that you have to flee to the United States or risk losing your life. And that's asylum seeking. And the number of asylum seekers in the United States, asylum granted, has gone from 5,000 in 2007 to 100,000 in 2016. And Sessions is working on cracking down on that, to his credit. Well, the European Union just announced mandatory asylum, in which they said each country has a certain quota of asylum seekers it must admit each year or face a cutoff of European aid. Now, Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, who was my client, I helped him get elected, he has been railing against that. He's got a country of 9 million people. Hungary has been losing population, and it's not like there's a vast number of Hungarians in the world. And he's saying, hey, we can't accommodate 500,000 or 600,000 Muslims in the country without our country going to hell, in the same way Germany is now, where terrorist incidents have quadrupled in the last year because of the influx of the Muslim population. And he's fighting the European Union. And in fact, Orban has said that it is George Soros who is manipulating the European Union into taking this position, that his money is behind this. And it's become a major crisis in Europe. And good for my guy Orban for sticking up for his beliefs. But that really is the same policy they're trying to pull in the United States.
Dick, Steve Strawn asks, if Mueller should recuse himself, then shouldn't Rosenstein also?
Yes, it would be together.
And Jean Marie wants to know, what is John Kerry's role in all of this?
Kerry, I'm not sure. Kerry, of course, was after Hillary, starting in 2013. Well, if the FBI was investigating this, it's possible that Kerry would know about it. It's possible he wouldn't. I just don't know.
And Suzanne Weatherby asks, is Jeff Sessions part of the deep state?
I hope not. He certainly wasn't before, and we'll just have to see how he acts. One of the key things that's going to be give us an indication of that is, will he permit the FBI confidential informant who infiltrated the Russian bribery scheme, will he permit him on uranium, will he permit him to testify before the House committee? I suspect he will, but let's keep our eye on that. Now, there's an entirely new approach going on to changing Obamacare and to not repealing it, at least replacing it with something. And it's a Republican approach launched by two quasi-rhinos. One is Orrin Hatch from Utah, who's been the longtime chairman of the Senate Health Committee, and Kevin Brady from Texas, who is the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, the most powerful committee there is. And what they're saying is the Democrats want to fund the subsidies to the insurance companies for Obamacare, because without that, the system crashes. So let them fund it, go along with them on that. If they agree to strip Obamacare of its most obnoxious elements, particularly the individual requirement that you buy insurance and the requirement that employers offer insurance. Now, they're not including in their demands the third thing that has to happen, which is to free any insurer to offer any policy they want, rather than require that they list all of these essential services, and rather than require that they do community rating, all of which drive up the premiums to incredible levels and make Obamacare a real burden on so many families. Those are the key quid pro quos. But the concept that we could allow the subsidy in return, in essence, for Democratic support for what would amount to repeal is an interesting one. Now, it's a slippery slope. We could go down that slope and vote the subsidies and be left empty-handed with nothing to show for it and not enough steps toward repeal. As, for example, I think Hatch and Brady are not going far enough. They're only talking about the mandates. They're not talking about what Ted Cruz has spoken of, which is the requirements of what be covered in Obamacare and community rating. But that approach could either be a real threat or it could be an opportunity. We need to see how it plays out, and I just wanted to raise it with you. Now, Trump has quietly, and I think that McConnell, who I generally don't like, made a really good point yesterday. He said that Trump is just not taking credit for a huge number of the changes that he's bringing about that are turning the American economy around. Yesterday, Donald Trump approved putting out for lease 76 million acres of offshore property owned by the federal government. You know, that's pretty huge. That's by far the biggest oil lease put up for grabs in American history. And it really makes offshore drilling much, much more attractive and will dramatically increase our oil production and again move further and further toward the kind of energy independence that we need and under Donald Trump are getting.
Amy Sheetreat Myers asks, what would happen if Hillary Clinton is incriminated, and what would it take to do that? Why is it taking so long?
Well, it's taking so long because she's so good at evading all of this. But there are now several things that need to be looked at. Your handling of the emails, the Clinton Foundation, the bribery, and particularly whether her vote in favor of selling uranium to Russia was influenced by the money that was paid to her and to her husband. And what you need here is a prosecutor to go into that, investigate that, and then come up with a recommendation for a prosecution. Now, from Britain comes some interesting comedy. There is a treaty on human rights, and as you know, the Declaration of Human Rights. And Britain has asked that it be amended, that so that when it talks about protecting a woman's right to pregnancy and to giving birth, it be changed to a person's right, because she says that men can have children now. And what she means is that there have been 2 cases of transgender people, men who became women who got pregnant and gave birth. And she wants to eliminate the gender linkage in that treaty. Oh, my God. Now, the Department of Justice has been engaged in an activity that is really now getting exposed by Sessions. It's good stuff that he's doing on that. Remember, after the mortgage crisis, the Department of Justice began to go after banks and mortgage companies and made these huge settlements with them, like $16.6 billion with the Bank of America for fraudulent subprime mortgages. Well, that settlement money that amounts to real money goes to the Treasury, and a certain amount of it is earmarked, in this case $1 billion, to help people who were hurt by the practice. And they don't mean by that giving money to each of the mortgagors. They should, but they don't, the people that took these mortgages. What they mean is giving it to community groups that often turn out to be far left to help the welfare of mortgage holders and tenants throughout the United States. And one of the major recipients of that money is ACORN, the ultra-liberal organization that has been so controversial in the past. And these settlements have become the major source of revenue for these leftist organizations. Originally, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were. They gave huge amounts to leftist groups. We revealed that in our book Outrage in 2000, whatever, 8 or 9, I think. But after they folded, these settlements took their place. And the result has been massive funding of these left-wing agencies that Sessions is now moving to cut off. I just wanted to note that the Patriot Gold Group sponsors our videos, and the more you look at Kim Jong-un, and the more you look at his threatening of nuclear war, and he spoke today of a hydrogen bomb exploding in the Pacific Ocean, all of that is going to be driving up the price of gold, because when currencies go crazy and people get worried about the safety of the world, they switch their investments to gold more and more because it never loses its value. So you might want to contact the Patriot Gold Group, patriotgoldgroup.com, and Renee is posting the phone number in the comments. There is a danger that the Republicans in tax reform are going to really hurt the 401k program. And this was proposed a few days ago, and Trump said he would never do that. But now Brady, the Ways and Means chairman, is saying they may do it. And what they're proposing is horrible. It says that instead of being able to sock away $18,500 tax-free that you can on the 401ks, you could only put aside $2,500. And that will way cut back savings for the middle class. It'll reduce the only real program we have to fund our retirement. And the Social Security gets more iffy, and interest rates are low, so our own savings don't protect us, and pension funds are going broke. The 401k may be the main thing we can rely upon in our old age. And to cut back the 401ks to $2,500 a year is ridiculous. It would be forever before you can get together enough money to retire on. So I hope that doesn't happen, and if it does, we'll talk you more and more about it, and we'll launch a petition and be very active in trying to preserve the 401k program.
Well, Michael Woods wants to know, will we see a drop in gas prices in the near future because of all that's going on? I guess?
Yeah, I think we will. I think you're never going to see big increases. I think they're remaining going to be somewhat stable or somewhat lower because of the big change. The real change in gas prices is going to be when we stop using gasoline. And starting in 2019, A lot of car companies, Porsche and a few others, are announcing that they are no longer going to be producing gasoline cars. They'll all be electric, and some may be hydrogen. And the more that happens, obviously, the more the demand for gasoline is dropping, and the more the price is going to drop. And I think that is the long-range future. Whether that'll manifest itself in the next few months or not, I just don't know. Well, I want to first mention the selfie of the day. Those are folks who are posing for pictures with rogue spooks holding the book, which is more relevant now than it has ever been. And that goes to Carol Nowatarski.
Nowatarski.
Carol Nowatarski Miller. Thank you, Ms. Miller. I appreciate it. And I also want to thank Daniel Freyer. We're using a new mic in this. You can't see it on my black sweater.
You can see it a little bit, yes, just a little.
But maybe it's maybe the sound quality of this stuff is better, and maybe it's easier to hear. And I want to thank him for recommending the mic that we use. And again, if you want to order a book plate to put into your copy of Rogue Spooks, and from me, contact Renee, and the way you do that is Dick Morris Promos, one word, @gmail.com. And you send in, I will then send you an autographed book plate, and I'll put whatever message you want. Dear Harry, I'm glad you stopped being a liberal. Or Dear Bob, Merry Christmas. Or Dear Mary and Bob, Happy Anniversary. Whatever you want me to write. Thanks a lot for watching.